Have you ever snapped out of a daydream and realized you were behind the wheel? That you'd been navigating turns and stops, yet couldn't quite recall doing any of it? Then all of a sudden, it hits you. Holy crap, I'm driving. That's exactly how it began for me. I was heading home for the holidays after finishing up a semester at college. The trip was one I'd done about half a dozen times by now, so I knew the road like the back of my hand. My thoughts were somewhere far away when I finally snapped back to reality and noticed the road ahead. My grip on the steering wheel was so tight it felt like I'd been clenching it for dear life. The dashboard clock read 12 a.m. Damn, I muttered to myself. How long had I been on autopilot? My brain felt hazy, like I'd been sleepwalking through the drive. The last clear memory I had was cruising down the highway, blasting Paranoid by Black Sabbath. But now, nothing around me looked remotely familiar. I felt a wave of exhaustion hit me hard. I needed to stop, grab an energy drink or something to keep me going. I squinted into the dark, hoping a gas station or convenience store would pop up within the next few miles. Beyond the reach of my headlights, though, was nothing but an endless stretch of black. After a while, still with no sign of life or civilization, I started wondering where the hell I was. I was supposed to be on Highway 9, the last leg of the journey before reaching home. Or at least that's where I thought I should have been. But the longer I drove through the empty darkness, the more convinced I became that I'd somehow taken a wrong turn. Reaching into my pocket for my phone, I came up empty. That sent a jolt of panic through me. I felt around the car, patting down every surface within reach, but all I found were a few crumpled-up food wrappers and an old, half-empty bottle of Gatorade. Frustrated, I decided to pull over and do a proper search. I couldn't navigate for crap without Google Maps, and tonight was definitely not the time to pretend otherwise. 5 minutes of fumbling around under the seats and digging through the console turned up nothing. My phone was gone. Had I left it in my dorm? Or maybe it fell out somewhere along the way. I couldn't remember, and that realization only made me feel more stuck. All I could do now was keep driving and hope to find someplace where I could ask for directions. I reached for the radio, thinking maybe some music would help keep me awake, but all I got was static. Of course, the radio had stopped working ages ago, and even though I thought I'd fixed it, apparently I was wrong. Great. Now I had nothing to keep me company but my own thoughts for the next hour, or however long this would take. I glanced at the clock on the dash and groaned. It still read 12 a.m. Perfect. Add a broken clock to the list of things wrong with my night. I shook my head and muttered, "Baby, I love you, but you've got some serious issues." My car was my pride and joy, a 1991 Camaro RS with white paint and red racing stripes. The custom paint job was long past its prime, though, and the radiator was practically held together with duct tape and prayers. She'd clocked over 200,000 miles and was definitely in need of some TLC, but I didn't exactly have the cash for that right now. Despite her flaws, I couldn't help but love her. Pushing aside my frustration, I kept driving. Eventually, I spotted a faint light in the distance. My heart lifted just a little. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as hopelessly lost as I'd feared. As I drove on, the light ahead grew steadily brighter, piercing the endless darkness like a lighthouse in a sea of night. After what felt like an eternity, the glow resolved into a neon sign. A looping green serpent coiled around fiery red letters spelling out the Midway Saloon. I pulled into the gravel lot, which looked like any dive bar I'd ever seen. A mix of classic cars and Harley-Davidsons were parked out front, but the most striking thing was tethered to a post near the entrance. A massive black horse. It wasn't unusual to see horses tied up at bars in the South, but this one was extraordinary. Its sheer size was imposing, and its coat gleamed like polished obsidian under the faint light. Its eyes caught the glow, reflecting it back in a way that almost seemed unnatural, as if they were illuminated from within. I parked next to an old Cadillac and stepped out of my car, gravel crunching beneath my boots. The warm night air felt heavier as the horse's unblinking gaze tracked my every move. Its glowing eyes sent a chill through me, and I hurried toward the tavern doors, trying not to look back. Inside, the familiar scent of cigarette smoke and stale beer washed over me. A jukebox in the corner played a song I vaguely recognized but couldn't name. The patrons were scattered around, some shooting pool, others throwing darts, and a few leaning on the bar, talking loudly. It could have been any roadside bar, but something about the place felt off. The bartender looked up as I approached the bar. He was a big guy with a neatly trimmed beard and slicked-back dark hair. His crisp white shirt and rolled-up sleeves gave him an air of old-school professionalism. Setting down the glass he was cleaning, he gave me a once-over before speaking. "New around here, huh? What'll it be?" I nodded, a little hesitant. "Yeah, just passing through. Actually, I'm not even sure where here is." He smiled, a knowing glint in his eye. "Passing through. That's a good one." I slid onto a bar stool and ordered a beer. "I'm trying to get a Highway 9, but I think I might have taken a wrong turn somewhere. Can you point me in the right direction?" The bartender shook his head as he placed the beer in front of me. "No, I can't help you with that. But I can tell you this. You're a long way from where you want to be." I frowned, unsure what to make of that cryptic response. "What's that supposed to mean?" He didn't answer, just gave me another faint smile before returning to the same glass he'd been polishing. I took a sip of my beer and glanced around. The people here were dressed in a strange mix of styles. A guy in the corner looked like a 1950s greaser, playing darts with someone straight out of the 1990s punk scene, blue mohawk and all. At the far end of the bar, a man in a tailored Wall Street suit was deep in conversation with two others dressed like Civil War reenactors. "You guys having some kind of costume party?" I asked. The bartender didn't respond, just kept polishing that glass, his expression unreadable. Taking another sip, I noticed a man sitting alone in a shadowy corner of the room. He wore a long black coat and a wide-brimmed cowboy hat, tilted low over his face. Something about him made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I motioned toward him. "Does that guy own the beast of a horse tied up outside?" The moment the words left my mouth, the atmosphere shifted. The jukebox went silent, and every patron in the bar stopped what they were doing to stare at me. Every pair of eyes, except for his. The man in the corner tilted his head up slightly, and I saw them, his eyes. The same cold, glowing gaze I'd seen in the horse outside. My heart skipped a beat as an icy dread crept over me. He wasn't just looking at me. He was looking through me, peeling back layers I didn't even know existed. I felt a hand clamp down on my arm. Startled, I turned to see the bartender leaning close, his expression deadly serious. "You'd best be on your way, son." I swallowed hard and nodded. Which way should I go?" "Just keep following the road," he said grimly. I reached for my wallet. "What do I owe you for the beer?" His stern face softened into a faint smile. "First one's always free." Confused, I stood and backed toward the door. The patrons had already returned to their conversations, as if nothing had happened. Outside, I avoided looking at the black horse as I hurried to my car. I just needed to get away from this place. Pulling back onto the road, I floored it, leaving the Midway saloon far behind. But the road didn't make sense. Time felt slippery, stretched thin, and warped. I couldn't tell how long I'd been driving when I spotted something in the distance. Faint shapes emerging from the darkness. As I got closer, I realized it was a town. Relief swept over me until I noticed what was wrong. The town was completely dark. There were buildings and houses, old and eerily intact, but no lights. No cars. No people. The streetlights loomed overhead, but none of them worked. I slowed to a stop in the center of the empty town. The hum of my engine echoed in the oppressive silence. I killed the ignition and stepped out, the click of my door latch unnervingly loud. "Hello," I called, my voice bouncing off the buildings and fading into nothing. A whisper answered, eerily mimicking my own. "Hello." Panic surged through me. I spun around, but no one was there. A flickering streetlight caught my eye. Under its stuttering glow, a figure stood, tall, skeletal, with skin like cracked charcoal. Then the light went out. When it flickered back on, more figures had joined him. A dozen, no, dozens of them, their burnt faces twisted into grotesque expressions. The light flickered again, and they were running. I fumbled with my keys, shouting at my car to start. When it finally roared to life, I floored it, plowing through the crowd of charred figures. Their hands clawed at my car, scratching the paint as I tore past. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The darkness swallowed the town as I sped away, but their whispers stayed with me, chilling my very soul. The road ahead twisted like a serpent, curving unnaturally, as if it was bending and reshaping itself, mocking the very idea of a straightforward path. The once familiar stretch of highway now felt unfamiliar, as if the landscape had decided to betray me. My headlights sliced through the night, casting long, flickering shadows against the thick wall of trees that lined both sides of the road. The forest seemed alive, too alive, its trees towering and reaching with an unsettling closeness, their gnarled branches resembling skeletal hands that stretched toward me as if trying to snatch me from my car. The faint rustling of leaves was the only sound, yet it was unnervingly loud, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Every mile I drove felt heavier. The stillness in the air seemed to weigh on my chest, pressing down like a physical presence. There was an odd sharpness to the silence, and I couldn't help but wonder why everything felt so suffocating. It wasn't the kind of peaceful quiet you get in the countryside. It was something darker, more ominous. It was as if the world had stopped turning for a moment, leaving me stranded in a place that had no right to exist. I could feel the weight of my thoughts pressing against me. Thoughts about the town I'd left behind, the things I'd seen. But I shoved those thoughts aside. The thought of going back was unbearable, far worse than whatever might be ahead. But deep down, I could sense something wasn't right. No matter how many times I reassured myself, the uneasy feeling in my gut refused to let go. Something was pulling me deeper into the heart of this unnatural place, leading me toward whatever awaited. As I rounded a particularly sharp bend, the headlights illuminated something ahead, something I hadn't expected. A bridge. It was almost anachronistic in its appearance. Old, rusted iron beams that arched over a deep, dark ravine. It was as if the bridge had been there forever, its presence out of sync with the modern road that had come before it. I couldn't have missed it if I tried, but somehow it felt like it had appeared out of thin air. The smooth asphalt beneath my tires gave way to cracked, splintering wood as the road transitioned. I stopped, stunned for a moment, trying to make sense of the jarring change in terrain. The bridge seemed impossibly old, its structure creaking in protest against the winds that had started to pick up, pulling at the edges of my jacket like icy fingers. The beam of my headlights bounced off the rusted rails as I slowly edged the car forward, stopping just a few feet from the edge. The air had shifted again, becoming colder than it had been moments before, and a sharp metallic taste filled my mouth. It was as if the air itself was thick with decay. My heart began to race, the eerie stillness making every beat feel too loud, too fast. I couldn't tear my gaze away from the bridge. There was no explanation for it, but it was like the bridge had been waiting for me. I hesitated. My instincts screamed at me to turn around, to drive away from this unnatural place, and never look back. But the thought of returning to that cursed town, facing whatever had been chasing me there, filled me with a deeper dread. It was as if something had already claimed that town, its dead silence, its absence of life, and there was no escape from it. I couldn't go back. Reluctantly, I stepped out of the car, my boots crunching loudly on the gravel as I took cautious steps toward the bridge. The night air bit at my skin, colder now than I had expected. A shiver ran up my spine, but I ignored it, taking slow, deliberate steps. The first board of the bridge groaned beneath my weight as I tested it, my breath coming in shallow bursts. It seemed to hold, but the sound, so unnatural, so ominous, made my skin crawl. The beam of my flashlight flickered for a moment, as if struggling against something unseen. The sudden darkness that fell when the light went out for that brief moment felt almost oppressive, as if the world was holding its breath along with me. I clicked the flashlight back on, the beam sweeping across the wood. The boards creaked again, and I winced at the harsh noise, feeling like something in the woods was listening, waiting. The beam fell on the gaps between the boards, and I could swear that, beneath the bridge, I saw movement, shadows shifting, writhing. I blinked and shook my head. It was just my imagination, or perhaps the way the beam was dancing over the surfaces. But that thought didn't reassure me. Then, from below, I heard it. A voice, soft, barely audible, yet unmistakable. "Hello? Is someone there?" I froze. My heart skipped a beat. The voice wasn't just a whisper. It was a plea, faint and desperate, but chilling all the same. My breath caught in my throat, and I found myself unable to respond for a moment. Was it real? The voice sounded human, but something in the way it echoed made me doubt its source. "Hello." It came again, louder this time, more insistent. "Please, I need help. I've fallen. My legs trapped. Can you hear me?" The words carried an edge of fear, raw and desperate, and I could feel a part of me wanting to help, to rush to this person's aid. But another part of me, the part that had seen too much already, urged me to retreat, to leave this place behind before whatever force lingered here took hold of me too. My legs felt like lead, my mind racing, but I knew I had to make a choice. "Who's there?" I called, my voice sounding hoarse even to my own ears. I gripped the edge of the bridge, peering over into the black void beneath me. "Are you okay? What happened?" There was a slight pause before the voice responded. "I'm down here. Please. I'm hurt. My leg is broken. I'm trapped." Her words were slurred, but they were enough to send a ripple of sympathy through me. Despite the unsettling situation, something about her vulnerability struck a chord deep within me. I moved closer to the edge, my pulse quickening, but as I peered into the darkness below, I saw nothing but the steep drop into shadow. "I'll get help," I said, my throat dry. "Wait right there. Don't move, No," she screamed, the sudden sharpness of her voice cutting through the stillness like a knife. "Don't leave me. Please." The panic in her voice hit me like a punch, and I took an instinctive step forward. I needed to help her. I needed to make sure she was okay. But something in the back of my mind screamed at me to stop, to turn back. I hesitated, almost as if I was being held by invisible strings, my body torn between the overwhelming need to assist and the gut-wrenching fear that something wasn't right. But then the voice softened again, pleading. "Please, I'm so scared. It's so cold. I can see your light. You're close." I glanced back at the car, feeling the weight of my decision heavy on me. The flashlight flickered, and for a moment, I thought it might fail me entirely. But the beam of light remained steady, and I found myself moving toward the path down the ravine without another word. The climb down was treacherous, the earth slick with moisture. Each step felt like it could be my last, and my heart was thundering in my chest, but I couldn't stop. Not now. I reached the bottom, gasping for breath, the beam of the flashlight cutting through the thick, damp air. At first, I saw nothing but rocks and shadows. Then, there it was, a flash of white, barely visible against the dark rocks, as if someone had draped a piece of cloth over them. I rushed toward it, my breath catching. My flashlight wavered, and for a split second I thought it was a trick of the light. But no, there was a body, crumpled and twisted, lying among the jagged stones. A woman's figure, her arms splayed at odd angles, her once dress torn and dirty, her skin ghostly pale. The light caught her face, and I froze. Her eyes, wide open, unblinking, locked onto mine, and her lips parted into a slow, unnatural smile. The skin of her mouth pulled back in an inhuman stretch, revealing jagged, yellowed teeth. "Found me," she whispered, her voice no longer pleading, but cold, cruel. In one swift movement, her broken body unfolded with a sickening snap of joints. She pushed herself upright, her head tilting at an unnatural angle, her bones creaking like ancient wood. The bones of her hands clicked as she rose, crawling toward me in an almost spider-like fashion. And with a guttural growl, she lunged. The moment I hit the floor, the tacky hands that had been gripping me seemed to melt away, their sickly, rubbery texture falling apart as if they were no more than decaying remnants of a nightmare. My chest heaved with ragged breaths, each inhale sharp and shallow, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. The world around me felt distant and unreal, the stench of rot still heavy in the air, as though it had seeped into my very soul. I barely had time to recover before I felt it. The coldest hands I had ever touched. They were huge, like the hands of something far older, far more powerful. They grasped me with an eerie gentleness at first, but the sheer icy chill of them made my skin crawl. I could feel my bones protesting as I was hoisted to my feet, dragged with ease across the diner, my legs stumbling beneath me like they no longer belonged to me. I could barely keep up as I was pulled toward the door, the weight of my own body threatening to collapse me at every step. I had no choice but to keep moving, my mind screaming for clarity. Before I could comprehend what was happening, I was unceremoniously thrown to the ground, the impact knocking the air from my lungs. I managed to lift my head, and that's when I saw him, the pale figure who had come to my rescue. He stood over me, his form looming like a vengeful ghost. His skin was unnaturally pale, stretched tight over hollowed cheekbones, a face that looked as though it had been carved from stone or chiseled from an ancient, decayed relic. The sunken hollows of his eyes burned with a cold, fierce intensity. His hair, pure white, like the winter frost, hung in long, tangled strands that reached down to his shoulders, swaying with a life of their own. There was a strange power in his stillness, a silence that screamed volumes. He locked eyes with me, and for a moment, I swore time itself had stopped. His gaze was unervingly intense, as if he could see through every fear, every dark thought I had ever buried deep inside. Then, without a word, he pointed a long, bony finger directly at me. "Stay." His voice was deep, too deep, gravelly, like the rumble of distant thunder, with an edge that carried the weight of untold years and the force of something far beyond human comprehension. I barely had time to process his command before he turned away. He moved with unnatural grace, his long coat fluttering behind him as he strode back into the diner. I could hear the metallic clinking of guns as they were drawn from his belt, massive revolvers that seemed out of place on his frail form. The sight of them sent a shiver down my spine. I turned toward the diner window, my heart pounding against my ribcage, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The corpses, those grotesque, twisted things, were slowly pulling themselves to their feet, their broken limbs jerking into place with sickening cracks and snaps. Some of them were missing entire chunks of flesh, their bones exposed and jagged, the gaping wounds a grotesque mockery of human form. Their eyes, though, those eyes, they never left me. They were fixed on me, as if they could sense my fear, drawn to me like a magnet to metal. The pale gunslinger, with a grim determination, kicked open the diner door with a force that made it splinter. He didn't hesitate. His revolvers roared to life in his hands, the deafening thunder of the shots echoing in the night air. Each shot sent ripples through the air, knocking the grotesque figures back with a force that ripped massive chunks of flesh from their already decaying bodies. The smell of burnt meat and charred skin filled the air, and I could hear the wet, meaty splat of pieces of them being torn away, falling like putrid rain. I couldn't watch any longer. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to escape whatever nightmare I had found myself in. Even though he had saved my life twice now, the sight of him, the eerie calmness in his eyes, the overwhelming dread he radiated, filled me with a kind of fear I couldn't shake. The man was a paradox, an enigma wrapped in skin that seemed to belong to another age, another world. And no matter how many times he helped me, I couldn't ignore the deep, gnawing fear that this pale stranger was not here to save me. He was simply allowing me to survive for reasons unknown. Without thinking, I pushed myself to my feet, my legs shaking beneath me as I sprinted around the massive, black stallion that stood between me and my car. The animal stood still, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light, but I didn't have time to make sense of it. I dove into the driver's seat, the engine roaring to life beneath my hands. My foot slammed on the gas pedal, and the tires screamed in protest as I floored it, speeding away from the diner and down the dark road. The world around me blurred, and time itself seemed to lose meaning. I didn't stop. I didn't need to eat or drink. My body moved on pure instinct, the road stretching on in front of me like an endless black ribbon. The headlights illuminated nothing but darkness ahead, and I kept driving, never questioning why I couldn't pull myself to stop. Days, hours, minutes, none of it mattered. The road became my only reality, the only constant in a world that had lost its sense of normalcy. The faces of the people in that diner, the burning eyes of the corpses, the pale gunslinger. Those images burned into my mind, lingering like ghosts. And deep in my gut, I knew I was no longer just running from them. I was running from something far worse. I was running from the hell I had stumbled into, a place where time had no hold, and the only thing that mattered was survival. If this was hell, then I had already crossed its threshold. I drove for what felt like an eternity. The road stretched on endlessly, winding through the night, swallowed by the blackness that surrounded me. Every mile, every turn, only led to more uncertainty, and soon it became impossible to tell how long I had been driving. Hours? Days? It all bled together into one endless blur. But then, through the haze, I saw it. A bright, jarring neon sign glowing ahead in the distance, casting its sickly colors across the dark landscape. The sign read, "The Midway." I pulled off the road and onto the gravel lot, the crunch of the stones beneath my tires almost too loud in the heavy silence. The sign loomed above me like an omen, the neon lights flickering in shades of red and green, casting an eerie glow that painted the night in unnatural hues. As I stood there, staring at the sign, something strange happened. For the first time, I noticed the serpent twisted into a perfect circle, its body curled around itself in an eternal loop. An Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail, the symbol of infinity. A paradox. That's when it hit me. There was no end to the road, no finish line, no place to go. It was just an endless cycle, a loop of misery and darkness, where time didn't exist, and everything fed into itself forever. I stared at the coils of the snake, watching them twist around and around, each revolution more maddening than the last. My mind felt like it was fracturing, my sense of reality slipping further and further away. And then I started to laugh. At first, it was quiet, the sound escaping my throat like a strangled gasp. But it didn't stop there. The laughter bubbled up, louder and louder, until I was doubled over on the ground, my body shaking with the force of it. The more I laughed, the less control I had over myself. For a while, I just let go, slipping into something like a trance, a place where the world no longer mattered, where I was free from the crushing weight of it all. I don't know how long I stayed there, laughing into the cold gravel, but when I finally came back to myself, I was sitting in the dirt, my body stiff and sore. I pushed myself to my feet, still feeling the remnants of my laughter bubbling beneath the surface, an unsettling echo in my chest. I staggered toward the door of the bar, the familiar creak of it opening greeting me like an old friend. Inside, the dim glow of the lights and the low hum of conversation seemed strangely normal, like nothing had changed, like time had been standing still. The bartender looked up from wiping down the bar, his expression unreadable. "Back so soon?" he asked, his voice dry and steady. I didn't answer immediately. I just walked over to the bar, sat down on a stool, and stared at the counter, trying to ground myself. The world felt like it was shifting beneath me, like I was caught between two realities, both of them slipping away at once. "I've been driving for days," I said eventually, my voice hoarse. "Maybe even weeks. I can't even fucking tell anymore." The bartender nodded, his face an unreadable mask. Weeks, months, years, they all blend together after a while. I blinked, my gaze snapping back up to meet his eyes. Had it really been that long? Was it possible? My heart skipped a beat, the weight of his words sinking in. His chuckle was low, almost amused. "They're just words. They don't really mean anything here." My mind reeled. "So, is this hell?" I asked, the question slipping from my lips before I could stop it. The bartender didn't flinch. He just shook his head, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "No, it ain't hell. It's just the road." I frowned, confused. "But what is the road?" He studied me for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if measuring the depth of my confusion. Well, some folks call it purgatory, some call it limbo, but it ain't really either of those things. This here's the traveler's road. It's where the lost souls of travelers end up. A chill ran down my spine. So, I'm dead. The bartender shrugged, his expression unreadable. Not entirely. I couldn't see it before, but there's still a thread of life in you. Wait, what? I'm still alive? I asked, my voice cracking with disbelief. He shrugged again, casual as ever. Partially. Your life's in the balance right now. I reckon that's why the rider's so interested in you. The rider? I repeated, the name sending a shiver through me. The bartender's gaze darkened. What he is, I don't rightly know. We just call him the rider around here. What I do know is that he's a hunter. He roams through all worlds, finds things that don't belong, and removes them. You, not being fully dead, don't fully belong here. So, he ain't sure what to make of you yet. I thought about the woman from the bridge, the way he had reduced her to nothing more than a pile of ash. Would that be my fate? But no, he'd spared me on the road. He'd saved me twice now. I shuddered at the thought. On the road, there were things that tried to kill me. The bartender's face hardened. The unnaturals, vengeful souls, ones that died unnatural or supernatural deaths. They feed off fear and pain. I swallowed hard, a lump forming in my throat. What would have happened if they killed me? The bartender's face grew grim. If they killed you, you'd stay here. You'd become one of them. I recoiled, the horror of it settling deep in my bones. The people in the diner, had they been lost souls once? I didn't want to know the answer. If I die, will I stay here? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. The bartender smiled sadly, but there was no warmth in it. I wish I could tell you you'd move on, but I don't know. My guess is that since you ended up here in the first place, this is where you'll stay. I shook my head, my mind spinning. But why? He leaned back, his gaze distant. Kid, I still don't know why I'm here. Some people do move on, but not many. And not often. It's one of life and death's great mysteries. Just then, a sound cut through the thick silence, a horse's snort, followed by the rhythmic clinking of spurs. Heavy footsteps, each one deliberate and measured. I turned instinctively toward the door, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. The door swung open, and I saw him. The rider. The moment the rider stepped through the door, the air around me shifted, cold and heavy, as if the temperature had plummeted into the depths of winter. I couldn't help but feel it, like the chill of death itself brushing against my skin. Goosebumps spread across my arms as I stood, frozen, my eyes locking with his. Thank you, I finally managed to say, my voice barely more than a whisper. It cracked as I tried to find my balance. Thank you for helping me. He didn't answer immediately. His gaze bore into me, hollow and terrifying, and for a moment, the world seemed to freeze, caught in the gravity of his stare. His presence was suffocating, and yet, I couldn't bring myself to look away. After what felt like an eternity, the rider gave a soft grunt, a brief nod, and then he turned, heading toward the back of the tavern without a word. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding and slowly turned back toward the bar. But the dizziness hit me like a freight train. My vision blurred, the edges of the room fading into a fog. My legs gave out, and I collapsed to the floor with a sharp thud, my body too weak to stop it. For a fleeting moment, all I could focus on was the faint glow of the bulb overhead, spinning like a distant star. But then it flared brighter, blinding me, until my world was consumed by a searing white light. A high-pitched ringing drowned out everything else. A voice, distant and muffled, cut through the ringing. Hey kid, can you hear me? I tried to speak, but my throat was raw, and no sound came out. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't listen. If you can hear me, follow the light, the voice urged. I didn't have to think about it. I just tried to follow it, reaching for the light with all the strength I had left. Good. The voice was closer now, clearer. Can you tell me your name? I blinked rapidly, trying to focus, but my eyes felt as though they were filled with sand. Hey, I think he's coming around. The voice shifted again, calling out to someone else. The next thing I knew, the world crashed back into place, jarring and painful. I was flat on my back, the harsh light of a flashlight blinding me. Paramedics surrounded me, their faces a blur. Someone was gently shaking me, asking me questions I couldn't answer. My head swam as I turned, trying to see through the haze. My car was smashed into a tree about 20 feet away. What time is it? I managed to croak, my throat tight and sore. The paramedic closest to me glanced down at her watch. 12:01, she said, her voice calm but laced with concern. Tears blurred my vision. I was alive. I was still here. You must have been having one hell of a dream. The paramedic continued as they started to load me into the ambulance. You kept talking about bars, monsters, and some guy with guns. Sounds like quite the story. I think I would have liked to see it. Despite the sharp pain gnawing at my body, I forced a small, bitter laugh. Yeah, some dream. I'm just glad it's over. Was it a dream, though? Was any of it real? I kept telling myself it had to be, but the sound of those heavy footsteps as they slammed the ambulance doors shut. The jangling of spurs? Was that just my mind playing tricks on me? Or was it something else? Something I didn't want to think about?